Our giveaway car, the 350 horsepower Mazdaspeed 3, ends this Wednesday. Click the link in the description and don't miss out. Hot mug, hot hatch. But the roots of this Mazda Ford 2.3-liter engine go back 40 years. Ford started experimenting with overseas four-cylinder engines as early as 1970. The Mazdaspeed 3 wouldn't exist without the Ford Pinto. Load up a XXX film on 16mm, drink spiced wine out of a goat bladder, and openly sniff snow in a school board meeting. It's a 1977 Ford Pinto Squire. This is a two-door wagon. And here it is. The connection between the Mazdaspeed 3 and the Ford Pinto. This is the original. This is Genesis. This is the 2.3 Lima engine, aka the T88, aka the Ford Metric, aka the Euro engine. Here it is. All that choo-choo Subaru fighting, Evo hunting power, it begins here. This engine is Elder Scrolls Arena. And you wouldn't believe that this modern hatchback and this 1970s wagon thing are related. You wouldn't believe that. Because this thing is slow. Yeah, Pintos blew up from butt stuff because they can't go fast enough to ram anything head on. Pedal down, and there's no acceleration. There's nothing here. They called this the Ford Select Shift. That means you can select how disappointed you are. It has 3 speeds. Useless, huh, and come on, man. This thing accelerates slower than a Plymouth from the 1950s. Maybe a Pinto is faster than a Beetle, and it's faster than a Chevette, at least. It's faster than a Ford Courier. Anything smaller than an Impala back then was advertised as having sporty European handling. This is sporty European handling.
Once you get going, it's not so bad.
Still going straight.
That rack and pinion steering is
Oh, this has a rack in it.
It does, yeah.
Wow. Remember in the early 1990s when every program that came on a CD-ROM had the word interactive on the box? Yeah, same marketing fluff going on here. A Ford Pinto handles like a beanbag. A Ford Pinto handles like an inflatable mattress in the common area of your dorm. A Ford Pinto handles like a playground spring horse. It handles like F-A-T-I-T-I-S. Driving a Pinto wagon today is more of an experience, or it's a display of intentionally looking so uncool, your automotive fashion just comes right back around again. Driving a Ford Pinto is like playing a 4AA battery green and black screen original Game Boy on an aisle seat on a Delta regional flight. Maybe you're wearing a Nintendo Power shirt while you do it just to make your point. Yeah, I know what I'm about. Yeah. Look, we're cruising in a Pinto. Maybe we'll make it. And this Pinto has 30,000 miles. Here's Kevin talking about how he found it.
I found it down in Virginia, actually, at a used car dealership. They actually had it there for over a year, and nobody wanted it. And so they put it on eBay, and that's where I got it. They only knew it was a one-owner car, and I have proof of that. And it was sold new in California, and I guess he drove it cross country, moved to Virginia, and that's where it was its whole life, and now it's here in PA. All I know is his name was David, I think, and he only put 26,000 miles on his Pinto for however long he owned it, which was, I guess, 42 years.
He was the original owner.
Yeah, original owner, yep. I would like to eventually reach out to his family, if I can, find out who they are, and just tell them, his car's still around, it's being taken care of as much as I can.
What sort of stuff did it need when you bought it?
Really nothing. I just did a little bit of carb tuning, and I just changed the oil.
How is the car running?
It's great. I do want to keep it as original as I can.
True.
So it's still got all the California emission stuff on it, which makes it slower. But
tell me how this behaves on the highway.
Surprisingly well. I've actually gotten it up to like 80, 81 was my top speed.
Get this thing into 80.
Yeah, on a downhill.
Right.
Yep. But it'll get up to like 60 pretty easily. We were doing like 65 the whole way here.
Okay.
Uphills are obviously a challenge. Gotta use my flashers pretty often.
Oh, okay.
if it's really
so
steep.
when we're out on the highway filming this, we may need to flash.
Maybe. It's only if there's like someone going slow in front of you, and then you can't keep the momentum.
Is it?
Up.
Yeah, it's just a 3-speed down here.
Yep, just a 3-speed select shift.
What do they mean select shift?
I guess you can just select 1 and 2 if you want, but I mean
select shift.
Yeah, it's
this is the same piece that was in the Mustangs going back to the 60s.
Yeah.
There it is there.
There it
I wonder
is.
if this is the exact look at that. I wonder if this is the exact same pieces that Ford just used all the way back to the early 60s. Is this AM radio only?
Just AM, yep.
Nice.
Yep. No power steering, which is kind of weird because this car it's the Squire package, which was like the top trim. It has all the wood paneling and all the nice trim in here, but he didn't get like any other options. He got an automatic and AM radio.
Huh.
No power steering. Let's see what else.
I don't want any of that flash
Yeah,
stuff.
don't need any of that. No AC, just a fan.
This was available with air conditioning?
Yes.
Oh, how slow would that be?
Ooh, very slow.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad it doesn't have it because, well, I mean, it would be nice in the summer. But
Oh, yeah.
as long as you don't have to take it on the highway.
Do these rear windows pop?
Yes, they do. Yep. Let's see if I can reach.
There's a lot of space back here.
Yeah, it's surprisingly roomy.
Have you used this car for any sort of like utility stuff outside of just car shows?
Not yet. I would like to eventually. What I really want to do is replicate this old ad where they put like a Christmas tree on top of the Pinto, and it said put a Pinto under your tree. And I thought that was kind of clever.
Yeah.
So what I really want to do is get a tree and put it on the roof and like recreate that ad.
Nice.
But I'm
Cool.
a little afraid of scratching the paint, but
Yeah.
One of the oldest phrases in modern vernacular is about someone's reputation preceding them. The concepts of your exploits being known so far and so wide that people come to a decision about you long before you've ever shaken their hand. It's a phrase that seems tailor-made for the Ford Pinto, a car that casts a shadow longer than its 163 inches. This was Ford's very first subcompact. Now, we can talk about the Falcon, and we can even talk about McNamara's plan to build the Cardinal that never happened. And this car had a brief life as a Mercury vehicle as well when it was rebadged as a Bobcat. Named after white patched horses, the Pinto was an appealing little car in the early age of the import craze and the struggle of American automakers to keep pace. But the Pinto is a unique case in the sense that even if its reputation as a fire trap is undeserved, and there are people who will argue that, it's still a tale of bad ideas and cut corners. This all started in the late 60s, when Lee Iacocca was president of Ford. He recognized that imports were beginning to take hold stateside, with cars like the Beetle, Corolla, and Datsun 510 cutting into the market share of American alternatives like the Falcon and the Maverick. The Ford Cortina offered a captive import brought over from Ford's European division, but it wasn't the same as actually tailoring a subcompact to the American market. And so Iacocca laid out the specs. The car had to weigh less than 2,000 pounds, cost less than $2,000, which is about $14,000 today, and Iacocca wanted it out quick, which meant the final design would be locked in early and remain mostly unchanged to prevent delays. Some guys don't have enough people who love them enough to tell them no, whereas some guys have so many people telling them no that by their very congregation, they're compelled to do the opposite. The Mustang had earned Iacocca the benefit of doubt on future decision-making, but that's not the same as actually having a good idea. Of course, we don't know what amount of pushback the Pinto received internally, only that the decision to rush the schedule would have far-reaching consequences. Released on September 11th, 1970, for the 1971 model year, the Pinto took just 25 months from idea to fruition. This was the shortest turnaround in automotive production history at the time, beating the 43-month average for production cars. The rush schedule meant the Pinto was exposed to design flaws that weren't caught until testing. In this case, a gas tank that was prone to rupturing. The tank was in the rear, on the undercarriage, with very little structural support. In low-speed crashes, a single spark could ignite the fuel vapors and light the car up like a tanker in Fury Road. But the cars were already in production, and the eggheads had determined that it would cost too much money to fix. This all came to light in the infamous Pinto memo, a glorified cost-benefit analysis which calculated that it would cost $11 per car to modify the fuel system, which would be a total expense of $137 million, versus the predicted $49.5 million in payouts if Ford was taken to court. In essence, it was cheaper to pay damages than to issue a recall. Do you remember that scene from Fight Club where the narrator says, "My job is to apply the formula"? This is it. If the average out-of-court settlement is less than the cost of a recall, we don't do it. And so, Ford stayed the course in one of the more ethically dubious decisions in automotive history. It was a dark stain on Iacocca's legacy, and if he hadn't saved Chrysler from bankruptcy a decade later, it's hard to imagine how he would have bounced back from this. Upon its release, the Pinto was praised for having sports car handling, an appealing design, and an affordable buy-in price. But it only took 2 months from release for Pintos to start being recalled, and not just from fuel tank issues either. The first 26,000 Pintos were recalled due to accelerator problems, while an additional 220,000 units were recalled over fuel vapors in the engine air filter, presenting an increased fire risk. But in spite of this, the Pinto sold well. It was cheap. They crossed the 100,000 unit line threshold in just 4 months, and tripled that figure to 352,402 units for 1971. Eventually hitting a high of 544,209 units for 1974, which is all the more impressive if you consider the public relations nightmare Ford dealt with over the lifetime of the vehicle they branded the Little Carefree Car. Ford didn't have legal issues. They had legal subscription. And it all started in 1972 with the tragedy that ended one life and ruined another. On a California freeway in 1972, a Pinto stalled and was rear-ended by an oncoming vehicle. The gas tank ruptured, and a spark ignited a burst of flames. The fire claimed the life of the woman driving the Pinto and disfigured her passenger, who suffered third-degree burns covering 90% of his body and required extensive skin grafting. A civil jury awarded over $2.5 million to the kid's family and nearly $600,000 to the family of the woman, in addition to $125 million in punitive damages to Ford, a figure that exceeded the amount Ford analysts had anticipated a recall would cost, but the number didn't stick, as Ford lawyers appealed the decision and got the penalty down to only $3.5 million, thus, sadly, proving the analysts right that paying damages would be cheaper and retroactively justifying a careless decision. Still, Ford wasn't going to take any more risks on cases they didn't think they could win, and wound up settling out of court on similar cases, for the most part anyway. Over the 9-year life of the Pinto, Ford was the subject to 117 lawsuits, with one of the more significant trials centering on the death of the Ulrich girls in the summer of 1978. The person driving the car had accidentally left the gas cap on the roof of the car after filling, and pulled over to retrieve it, at which point the car was rear-ended by a van, causing a fire that killed 3 teenage girls. A recall notice didn't arrive for the Ulrich family until 1979, just salt in the wound that was already going to stay open forever. The Ulriches sued, and in a landmark decision, Ford was charged with 3 counts of reckless homicide by an Indiana grand jury, making this the first time a corporation was charged with homicide. But Ford was acquitted after the defense basically pointed the finger at other manufacturers, claiming that they weren't any less safe and that this could have happened to anybody. And while Ford did lose a civil suit, they only had to pay $7,500 to each plaintiff. What apparently made the Pinto dangerous was a combination of placement and structural support, or more importantly, the lack thereof. The gas tank was centered between the rear bumper and the rear axle, which was hardly anything new in American automotive standards. My Ford Falcon was the exact same way. In fact, this might be the exact same part number for the tank. But, unlike the Falcon, the Pinto had far less crash space between the rear axle and the bumper than the average subcompact, which was already at a crush space deficit in comparison to standard-sized cars. In the court documents from Grimshaw v. Ford Motor Company, the problems were as follows. Number 1. The Pinto's accelerated schedule meant that styling preceded engineering and dictated engineering design to a greater degree than usual. Number 2. The styling of the Pinto meant that it only had 9 or 10 inches of crush space, a dangerously small number. Number 3. The design meant the bumper was little more than a chrome strip. Number 4. It lacked reinforcements from hat sections, basically 2 longitudinal side members. It also lacked structural bracing in the form of horizontal cross members running between the hat sections, meaning the Pinto was less crush-resistant than other cars. And number 5. The differential housing had exposed flanges and a line of exposed bolt heads which could puncture the gas tank on a rear impact. Complicating the matter of Ford's complacency was the state of regulations in the late 1960s, which didn't take rear collisions into account. When the National Traffic Highway Safety Administration made their proposal to include rear impact crashes in testing, the Pinto was already in month 18 of its 25-month production cycle, with many of the components locked in. In a compromise that prevented them from shelving the Pinto, Ford volunteered to meet the stricter 20-mile-per-hour fixed barrier testing standard by 1973. Tests with a modified Ford Maverick in 1970 already proved that Ford had issues to worry about, with low-speed crashes revealing potential flaws in Ford's fuel system design. Even American Motor Company enlisted their fuel system engineers to conduct tests on a Ford design, revealing more potential vulnerabilities. After the Pinto's release, Ford resisted an outright recall for as long as they could, even after the lawsuits and deaths. News magazine Mother Jones, in the infamous Pinto Madness essay in 1977, claimed that over 900 deaths were caused by Ford's carelessness. Ralph Nader went on the offensive as part of his consumer advocacy efforts and held a news conference in Washington, D.C. to basically rake the Pinto over the coals for its lack of safety. This forced a second investigation by the NHTSA that concluded on May 8, 1978, when they determined that the Pinto had a faulty fuel system. Ford argued that the NHTSA were buckling to public pressure and changing their testing methods to ensure the Pinto failed, such as using a bullet car instead of a moving barrier, and testing a Pinto where they filled the gas tank all the way up, including all the way up the filler neck, rather than using a partially filled tank of non-flammable liquid. The NHTSA investigation attributed some 27 deaths to the Pinto's faulty system between 1970 and 1977. That's when Ford stopped putting up a fight, because there was no way to salvage the Pinto's reputation. The only thing that could happen was more lawsuits and bad press. And so, they initiated a voluntary recall in June of 1978, just before the official order came down from the NHTSA, sort of the automotive equivalent of quitting before you get fired. About 1.5 million Ford Pintos and Mercury Bobcats were recalled, and then they were modified with safety improvements like a better tank filler seal and structural reinforcements like a shield between the tank and the exposed flange and bolt heads. Contemporary analysis by former UCLA professor Gary T. Schwartz suggested that the Ford Pinto was more or less standard for its class in terms of cars on the road at the time. In fact, he argued that the Pinto was in fact safer than its foreign opponents like the Corolla, the Beetle, well, of course, a Beetle is a death trap, and the Datsun 1200. But Pinto took the heat, and now the Pinto's reputation remains as a symbol of corporate negligence and greed. In a lot of ways, the Pinto is the equivalent of dating someone for a year and then finding out they're a hollow earther. It's like, why can't you just be who I thought you were? You know? Why do you have to toast the bread, get it all nice and golden brown, add crisp bacon, fresh lettuce, and a juicy tomato, only to drop a wet, tangy deuce between the buns? Some people will look at the sandwich and say, it's not any more harmful than any other sandwich you might get, or even the, everything's gonna kill you, while stepping over the bodies of the people who died eating it. But even if a sandwich is mostly good, it really doesn't take much to overwhelm the positives. Now in 2021, a Pinto can exist outside of its reputation. It's almost 2022, and now this is a funky, cool wagon. And of course, it existed as a sedan, hatchback, and everything else. Two-door wagon. This thing is hip. This thing is cool. This thing will kill you. But now that's kind of the scene. I had fun driving it, even if I didn't get very far or go very fast.
A bad reputation for a little carefree car, caused more than just frustration from its fuel tank reservoir. Once called it a bobcat or a horse in patchy white. It cost them a fortune for each case they had to fight. My Ford's here.